Clara was not a daughter. She was a chore. At 19 years of age, she had come to understand her place in the world with the dull, aching acceptance of a mule tethered to a grindstone. She was plain. It was not a cruel assessment, but a simple fact, like the color of the Kansas sky or the grit of the dust that settled on every surface of their cramped sod house. Her hair was the color of wet straw, her eyes the color of mud, and her face held no feature that anyone, least of all her own family, had ever found cause to remark upon. She was a burden. In the meager light of their home, her older sister, Rosalie, was the sun. Rosalie, with her bright yellow hair and eyes the blue of a robin's egg, was their father's ambition. She was celebrated, kept soft-handed, and paraded before the few eligible men in their dusty, struggling town. Rosalie was presently engaged to Mr. Davies, a merchant from 2 counties over who owned his own store and wore a suit on Sundays. The preparations for this union had consumed the household for months, a whirlwind of bleached flour sacks being stitched into linens and hushed, excited whispers about Rosalie's future. During these preparations, Clara's role was to be invisible and useful. She hauled the water, scrubbed the floors until her knuckles were raw, mended the unfixable, and turned the lye soap. When Mr. Davies came to call, her father, Jedediah, would hook a thumb toward the lean-to. "Take the mending, girl. Don't need you underfoot." Clara would slip away, her smallness a practiced skill. She would sit in the shed, listening to the thin melody of Rosalie's laughter through the wall, and feel nothing but the wind. To feel anger, or even sadness, was a luxury. She was simply a cost, a mouth to feed, a space that would one day be needed. Her father was a poor man, but an ambitious one, which made him a bitter creature. He saw the world as a ledger that was stubbornly, unfairly balanced against him. His daughters were his only assets. Rosalie was proving to be a fine investment. Clara was a debt. The day her life was traded, the air was thick and yellow with dust. Jedediah came home from town, his footsteps heavier than usual. He did not smell of whiskey, which meant the news was business, not pleasure. He sat at the rough-hewn table, looked at his wife, then at Rosalie, and finally, his gaze settled on Clara like a hook. "Clara, you're promised." The words hung in the air. Her mother's hands, which were peeling potatoes, went still. Rosalie's face, bent over a piece of lace, lifted in confusion. "Promised?" Clara's voice was a dry croak. Jedediah nodded, a strange satisfaction pulling at his mouth. "Man I've been in correspondence with. Up in the Montana territory. A rancher." "Montana," her mother finally spoke, her voice thin. "Jedediah, that's 1,000 miles. It's an opportunity," he snapped, his authority returning. "A Mr. Eli Mercer owns a spread of land bigger than this whole county. A rich man." He paused, savoring the weight of his next words. "He needs a wife. He's particular, doesn't want some flighty social thing from the East. Wants a worker." His eyes cut back to Clara. "I told him you were quiet and strong." Clara stared at the packed dirt floor. A wife. The word sounded foreign, like a language she had never been taught. "What? What of the arrangement?" her mother asked, her eyes narrowing with the practicality of a woman used to bartering. "Mr. Mercer," Jedediah said, puffing his chest, "has agreed to clear my entire debt at the general store, and in the spring, a man of his will be driving a herd of 5 good heifers south for us." Silence. 5 heifers and a clean slate. That was her price. Rosalie finally spoke, her pretty face wrinkled in distaste. "But Pa, he hasn't even seen her." "He's seen her description. It was satisfactory." Jedediah slammed his hand on the table, a sudden, violent motion that made them all jump. "It is done! A trader, a Mr. Silas is passing through. He's been paid by Mercer to see you there. He leaves at dawn tomorrow. Pack your things." Clara looked up, her heart a cold stone in her chest. "My things," her father scoffed. "Whatever rags you mean to carry, don't matter to me. Just be ready." There was no ceremony. There was no goodbye. That night, Clara packed her few belongings into a canvas satchel, her mother's old Bible, a spare dress of rough homespun, and a comb with 2 teeth missing. Her mother busied herself with Rosalie's trousseau, her back stiff. Rosalie offered Clara a pair of worn ribbons, a gesture of such thoughtless pity that it stung more than a slap. Before the sun had touched the plains, Clara was sitting on the hard bench of a freight wagon, beside a man named Silas. He was leathery and smelled of tobacco and dust. He checked the note from her father, glanced at her once, and nodded. "Mr. Mercer paid for your passage and provisions. Don't expect conversation." He did not lie. For 3 weeks, they moved. The world Clara had known, the flat, brown, predictable square of Kansas, fell away. It was replaced by a landscape so vast and empty it terrified her. They crossed rivers, climbed through rolling prairies that seemed to have no end, and skirted herds of buffalo that blackened the horizon. Silas spoke only to his mules or to the occasional soldier at a fort. Clara was cargo. She ate hardtack and dried beans, her insides churning with a loneliness so profound it ceased to be an emotion and became a state of being, like breathing. When they finally crossed into the Montana territory, the land changed again. The sky was bigger, a piercing, painful blue. And then she saw them. The mountains. They were not the gentle hills of stories. They were jagged, purple wounds against the sky, sharp and hostile. "That's the Mercer Range," Silas said, pointing with his chin. It was the first time he had spoken directly to her in a week. She looked. It was not a ranch. It was a kingdom of desolation. The wagon rumbled for another half-day, passing endless miles of new, cruel-looking barbed wire fencing. She had never seen so much wire. It seemed to hold the very curvature of the earth. Finally, a house appeared, growing from the valley floor. It was a large, 2-story structure made of timber, not sod. It was imposing, dark, and still. A few barns, dusty and in need of paint, sat nearby. The wind, which had been her only companion for weeks, howled here, a high, mournful sound that seemed to circle the house without end. A man was standing on the porch. He was tall, taller than any man she had ever seen, and built like the timber of his house. He wore dark trousers and a plain work shirt, his form silhouetted against the setting sun. As the wagon creaked to a halt, Silas grunted, "We're here." Clara climbed down stiffly, her legs trembling. She clutched her satchel. The man on the porch did not move. He did not come to help her. He just watched. Silas unhitched a mule. "Got her here. Mercer." The man's voice was a low rumble, like rocks shifting. "Payments with my man in the barn. Get your provisions and be gone." "Pleasure, Mr. Mercer." Silas did not look at Clara again. He led his wagon toward the barn, and she was left standing in the yard, a small, plain speck in a universe of brown grass and screaming wind. The man, her husband, walked down the steps. He stopped 10 feet from her. Eli Mercer was in his early 30s, but his eyes were ancient. He was not a handsome man, but he was striking. His face was all harsh angles, his jaw firm, his hair black as a crow's wing. And then she saw the scar. It started near his left temple and pulled down, catching the corner of his eye and drawing a tight, white line along his jaw. It was an old burn, pale and smooth. It made him look permanently grim, as if one side of his face were forever bracing for a blow. He looked at her for a long, silent moment. He took in her dusty dress, her wind-chapped face, her plainness. She felt her very soul shrivel under his gaze. "You're here," he stated. It was not a welcome. Clara could only nod. He turned toward the house. "Come." She followed him inside. The house was cold. The front room was massive, dominated by a stone hearth so large she could have stood in it. The furniture was heavy, dark, and masculine. There was no softness, no color, no sign that a woman had ever lived here. Dust motes danced in the thin light from the windows. He did not stop. He led her up the stairs to a hallway with several closed doors. He opened one. "This will be your room." Clara looked inside. It was a proper room, with a real wooden bedstead, a washstand, and a small wardrobe. It was far finer than anything she had ever had. It was also at the opposite end of the hall from the large door she assumed was his. He stood in the doorway, a shadow filling the frame. He did not offer her a kiss. He did not touch her hand. He did not offer a word of comfort after her long journey. "I will be plain with you. Mrs. Mercer," he said, the name sounding like a curse. "I require a wife for legal and social reasons. This land, my father's land, requires a name to pass to. The law is particular about such things. The county gossips are worse." He paused, his scarred eyes seeming to look through her. "I have no need of affection. I do not require a partner in my bed. I require a woman to keep this house, to sign papers when needed, and to bear the Mercer name. You will have your duties. You will have food and a roof. You will not be harmed here. But this is a contract. It is not a romance. Do you understand me?" Clara felt the last flicker of some girlish hope she hadn't even known she possessed, gutter and die. He had not bought a wife. He had bought a housekeeper with a legal title. She was heartbroken, but the feeling was so familiar, so expected, that it settled over her like her old, thin shawl. She was used to being unwanted. She looked at the floorboards. "I understand. Sir, good." He turned to leave, then stopped. "My men eat in the bunkhouse. You and I will take our meals in the dining room. Supper is at 6. Do not be late." He left. She heard his heavy boots descend the stairs. And then, silence. Clara walked into the room and set her small satchel on the bed. She went to the window. There was nothing to see but dry hills, brown grass, and the endless, howling wind. It was the sound of her own emptiness given voice. She did not cry. She simply stood and watched and faded into the silence of the house. She unpacked. It took less than a minute. She placed the Bible on the washstand. She hung her spare dress in the wardrobe, where it looked small and pathetic in the cavernous, dark space. For the first few days, she explored. It was the only way to keep the crushing weight of the silence at bay. Eli Mercer rose before dawn and was gone. She would see him riding out, a tall, remote figure, checking his endless lines of barbed wire. The ranch was a place of harsh survival. The barns were dusty and smelled of old hay and horse sweat. The horses were not spirited animals, but old, tired stock, their ribs showing slightly. There were few ranch hands, perhaps only 4 or 5, and they were as silent as their employer. They were leathery men who tipped their hats when she passed, their eyes sliding away from her face. But they never spoke. The land was hard. The life was harder. Clara fell into the rhythm she knew. She scrubbed floors that were already clean. She aired out blankets. She scrubbed the massive, unused kitchen. She was a ghost in a house that was already dead. Eli spoke to her only when necessary. "The pantry is stocked. We are low on coffee. The man will be here for the mail on Friday." They ate their meals in the grand dining room, at a table long enough for 20. He sat at one end, she at the other. The 20 feet of polished wood between them was an impassable chasm. The only sounds were the scrape of a fork on a plate and the relentless shriek of the wind outside. One night, she lay in her cold bed, rigid, listening to the silence of the house. And then she heard it. It was thin and reedy and achingly sad. She sat up. The sound was coming from downstairs. It was a harmonica. Someone was playing an old, slow tune about loss, the notes rising and falling like a broken breath. It was coming from Eli's study, the door she was never to approach. She listened, her hand pressed to her mouth. The music was not perfect. It was hesitant, flawed, and so full of a loneliness that matched her own. She could hardly bear it. It was the first human sound she had heard from him. It was the first sign that the man of iron and scars was a man at all. When the music stopped, the silence that rushed back in was heavier than before. Clara lay back down, pulled the quilt over her head, and for the first time since she'd left Kansas, she cried. She cried quietly, into the pillow, for the man playing the harmonica, for the price of 5 heifers, and for the vast, empty room that was her new life. He was distant, but he was not blind. A week later, they were eating breakfast. The silence was the same as always. Clara reached for the bread, and her hand, chapped raw and red from hauling water in the dry, cold air, trembled in the morning light. "There is salve in the kitchen pantry," Eli said. His voice, so sudden in the quiet, made her jump. She flinched, pulling her hand back as if she had been struck. He watched her, his face unreadable. He had seen the way she flinched at any unexpected kindness, the way she made herself smaller when he entered a room, the way she ate only after he had taken his portion. He saw the bruised, broken skin on her hands. He said nothing else. He returned to his meal. Then the snow came. It did not begin gently. It arrived like a declaration of war, a white wall that slammed into the house and erased the world. The wind no longer howled. It screamed. For days, they were trapped. The hands were bunked in the barn, safe with the stock. The house was an island in a roaring white sea. The cold was a physical thing. It seeped through the walls, through the glass. The grand dining room was unusable. On the second night of the storm, Clara was making a thin stew of dried venison and root vegetables when Eli came into the kitchen. "Bring it to the hearth," he said. He had built a massive, crackling fire in the great stone hearth in the front room. It was the only truly warm place in the house. He laid out 2 blankets on the floor. She brought the bowls, and they ate there, by the fire, sitting on the floor like travelers. The storm raged outside, a living thing trying to tear the house apart. For a long time, they just watched the flames, the shared danger, the shared warmth, created a temporary truce. He spoke first, his voice low, directed at the fire. "This was my father's land. He came here with nothing but 2 mules and an axe. He broke himself on it, built this hearth with his own hands." Clara watched his profile, the way the firelight caught the good side of his face and threw the scar into deep shadow. She found her own voice, small and rough. I never had a dress that fit." He turned to look at her. It was the first time he had truly looked at her. Not through her. "My sister, Rosalie." Clara continued, staring at her own raw hands. She was the pretty one. She had new things, calico, lace, sometimes. Mine were always hers, after she was done with them. The seams were always in the wrong place. They pulled at the shoulders. She stopped, embarrassed, wondering why she had said it. It was such a small, stupid thing. Eli looked at her for a long moment, at her straw-colored hair and her plain, earnest face. He gave a single, sharp nod. He turned back to the fire. "We'll need more wood before morning." The silence returned, but it was different. It was not the empty void of the dining room. It was a shared quiet, filled with the crackle of the fire and the sound of the storm they were surviving together. The snow did not stop for 5 days. The world became a white, roaring void, and the house, once a cavern of cold silence, became their fortress. The wind was a physical weight, pressing against the timber walls, shrieking at the windows with a voice that sounded human in its fury. Time lost its shape, marked only by the shifting of the light from gray to black. Clara awoke on the 3rd morning not to the cold, but to the smell of wood smoke. She lay still, listening. The wind was still loud, but beneath it was a new sound, the settled crackle of a fire. She dressed quickly, her fingers fumbling with the buttons, and went downstairs. Eli was not there, but the great stone hearth was blazing. The room, which had been so vast and cold, was filled with a pulsing, orange warmth. On the wooden table near the fire, a place he must have known she would see, sat a loaf of dark bread and a tin cup of coffee, still steaming. She touched the cup. It was hot. He had been there only moments before. He had lit the fire for her, before she woke. A strange, painful tightness filled her chest. It was the first kindness, the first act of consideration she had received since she could remember. It was not given with a word or a look. It was given in silence, like an animal leaving a gift. She drank the coffee, and it was hot and bitter and wonderful. The silence of the house changed. It was no longer the empty, aching silence of 2 strangers at a long table. It was the full, heavy silence of two people trapped in a box, intensely aware of each other's every breath, every movement. He spent his days in the barn, he said, checking the stock, but he was always back before dark, his clothes dusted with snow. Clara could not be idle. The idleness was worse than the cold. She explored the house, a prisoner pacing her cell, and in a back storage room, under a dusty canvas, she found a wooden chest. It was filled with bolts of fabric. There was dark, heavy wool and a thick, yellowed muslin, and, surprisingly, a bolt of deep blue calico, printed with small, hopeful-looking flowers. They must have been for his mother, or perhaps for the life he had planned before the fire. She took the muslin. She took a needle and thread from a forgotten sewing box. She sat by the fire, the one he now lit for her every morning, and she began to sew. She measured the cold, rattling windows. She cut and stitched, her hands chapped and stiff, the needle awkward in her fingers. But the work was a comfort. The simple, repeating motion was a prayer. She was making something. She was putting a mark on this place. When Eli came in that evening, stamping the snow from his boots, he stopped. She was sitting on the floor, the firelight catching the dull straw of her hair, and a long, pale sheet of muslin was draped across her lap. He said nothing. He watched her for a full minute, his face in shadow. He watched her hands, the quick, small movements. He turned and went to his study. The next day, she hung the first set of curtains. They were plain, they were simple, but they covered the black, screaming pane of glass. They softened the room. They held the warmth in. The house began to feel less like a tomb and more like a shelter. When the muslin ran out, she moved on to his clothes. She found his mending basket. It was overflowing. Shirts were missing buttons, seams were split, cuffs were frayed. She took them, one by one, and repaired them. This was a different kind of sewing. This was intimate. She held his shirts to the light, seeing the places he was hardest on his clothes, the strain across the shoulders, the wear at the elbow. She stitched the rough wool, her needle passing through fabric that was shaped by his body, that smelled faintly of him, leather and pine, and a faint, metallic scent of the cold. She worked, and he watched. He was a man of profound stillness. He would sit in his chair across the hearth, not reading, not working, just staring into the flames. But she felt his eyes on her. She felt his gaze linger on her hands, on the curve of her neck as she bent over her work. The presence of her small, quiet industry changed the house. It was still silent, but it was no longer cold. One night, the storm had paused. The wind had died down to a low, mournful moan, and the silence inside felt heavier for it. Eli had not gone to the barn. He had been restless all day, pacing the front room, looking out the new curtains at the world of white. That evening, he did not sit in his chair. He pulled a bottle of whiskey from a cabinet, a dark, amber-colored thing, and a single glass. He sat at the hearth, his back against the stone, and poured. Clara sat in her usual spot, mending a pair of his heavy work trousers. The fire crackled. The sound of him swallowing the liquor was sharp in the quiet. He poured a second glass, then a third. She kept her eyes on her needle, her heart starting a slow, heavy beat. He was not a drinker. She had learned that much. He was a man of rigid control. That control was now slipping. "She left," he said. Clara's needle stopped. Her hand froze in midair. His voice was rough, rusted. He was not speaking to her. He was speaking to the fire. "Annabelle," he said, the name tasting like ash. "Daughter of a merchant in Bozeman. She liked pretty things. She liked my name. She liked the idea of this house." He drank again, the whole glass this time. Her brother, young, stupid, thought he was a man, went into the new barn we were raising, drunk, with a lantern, tripped, hay went up like tinder. He stared at his own hands, large and scarred, spread open on his knees. "I heard the screaming, went in, the whole place was fire. The boy was trapped under a falling beam, his leg broken. I got him out, I got him on my back, but the loft gave way. He was silent for a long time. Clara did not breathe. The fire, it fell on me, on my face, my back. I got the boy out, threw him in the trough, and then I fell. He touched the scar on his jaw, a gesture she had never seen him make. It was not a gesture of vanity, but of memory. I was in a dark room for a month. The doctors said I was lucky to keep the eye. When they finally let her in to see me, he laughed, a short, ugly sound that had no humor in it. She tried. God, she tried to be brave, but she could not look at me, not at this. He gestured to his face. She saw a monster, a broken thing. Her father sent a letter 2 weeks later. The engagement was off. She married a banker from Helena 6 months after that. He poured another drink, but his hand was shaking, and the whiskey sloshed over the rim. So I built the fences, he whispered, his voice thick. I built the wire, and I swore I would never let another person in, never let a soft, pretty thing near me. They break. They all break. He looked up, and his eyes found hers in the firelight. They were raw, filled with a pain so deep it was a physical thing in the room. He was challenging her, daring her to show the revulsion he expected. Clara's heart ached. It was not pity she felt. It was a fierce, sharp anger. Not at him, but at a world that could burn a man for saving a life and then discard him for the scars. She put the trousers down. She did not think. She acted. She moved from her chair, crawling the few feet on the hearthrug that separated them. He tensed, watching her. His eyes narrowed, suspicious. She stopped in front of him. He smelled of whiskey and old sadness. She lifted her hand, her own hand, chapped and scarred from lye soap and needlework. Gently, so gently. She laid her fingers on his jaw. She touched the scar. She traced the pale, tight line from his temple, down past the corner of his eye, along the hard line of his jaw. It was not rough. It was smooth, like old porcelain. It was just skin. Eli sucked in a sharp breath, as if she had struck him. He jerked his head away, his whole body recoiling. "Do not," he snarled, his voice a low growl. He stood up abruptly, a sudden, violent motion that sent the whiskey bottle clattering onto the rug. He stared down at her, breathing hard, his face a mask of old fury and new terror. Clara did not flinch. She kept her hand raised in the air between them for a moment, a question he had refused to answer. Then, slowly, she lowered it. He turned and strode from the room, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. She heard his study door slam, and the bolt slide home. She sat by the fire for a long time, the dropped whiskey bottle slowly spilling a dark stain onto the wood. Something had happened. Something had been spoken that could not be taken back. A wall had been breached, and though he had pulled away, she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that he was the one who was truly afraid. Spring came like a sudden thaw. The world, which had been white and dead, exploded into a riot of muddy brown and pale, hopeful green. The roar of the melting snow in the creeks replaced the shriek of the wind. Clara could not stay inside. The house, once her shelter, now felt like a cage. She had mended every shirt. She had scrubbed every floor. She needed the sky. She followed him outside. "Go back to the house, Clara," he said, not looking at her. He was checking the cinch on his saddle. "No," she said. He stopped. He turned. His face was hard, the scar vivid in the bright morning light. "This is not work for a woman. I am not a woman," she said, her voice steady. "I am your wife, and I am a worker. My father did not sell you a useless thing. I can work." He stared at her. She stared back, her chin raised. She had braided her hair that morning, a thick, tight plait that pulled her plain features taut. She looked fierce. A muscle worked in his jaw. He gave a sharp, frustrated grunt. "Fine, but stay out of the way, and do not slow me down." He did not slow down, and she did not stay out of the way. She learned the hiss of a rope, the smell of cattle, the grueling, back-breaking labor of a ranch. She fed stock, her arms aching as she pitched hay. He taught her how to patch the endless miles of barbed wire, his large, gloved hands guiding hers on the stretching tool. "Pull it tight," he'd rumble, his voice impatient. "Tighter than that. It has to sing, or the cattle won't respect it." Her hands, which had just begun to heal, were torn open again by the wire and the cold, wet leather. He said nothing, but the next morning, a pair of small, sturdy work gloves were sitting on the porch rail. She put them on. They fit. The true test came in April, during calving season. A young heifer was in trouble. The calf breached. Eli worked for an hour, his arm buried to the shoulder, his face grim with sweat and frustration. "It is no use," he said, pulling his arm out. He was covered in blood and muck. "The calf is turned. My hand is too large. I will have to cut the calf out to save the mother." "No," Clara said, stepping forward. He looked at her, his eyes wild. "Clara, this is... Your hand is too large. Mine is not." She was already rolling up the sleeve of his mended shirt, the one she wore for work. "Tell me what to do." He hesitated, his face a storm of indecision. The heifer gave a low, agonizing moan. "Tell me," she commanded. He looked at her, at this plain, quiet woman, and saw the steel he had mistaken for emptiness. "Feel for the legs," he said, his voice dropping into that of a commander. "You must find the two front legs. Pull them together. Turn them. I will help push from here." She plunged her arm into the heat and darkness, into the chaos of birth. She did not retch. She did not faint. She closed her eyes, her mind fixed on his voice, her hands searching. "I feel them," she gasped. "I have them. Now pull gently, with the mother, now." She pulled. The animal screamed, and Eli roared, and there was a sudden, slick release. A small, wet, and utterly still form slumped onto the hay. "It is dead," she whispered, her arm falling to her side. "No," Eli said. He grabbed the calf, clearing its mouth, and gave it a hard, shaking slap. The calf sputtered, coughed, and let out a thin, reedy wail. Clara sagged against the wall of the stall, her entire body trembling. Eli was busy with the mother and the calf, rubbing the small creature with straw, his movements rough but efficient. After a moment, he looked over at her. She was filthy, covered in blood and sweat, her hair falling from its braid. She looked exhausted and battered, and more alive than he had ever seen her. His eyes lingered on her face, a strange, unreadable expression. "Go to the house," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. "Clean yourself." She nodded, unable to speak, and stumbled back toward the house. Their hands brushed when he passed her the wire tool. His eyes stayed on her for a beat too long when she wasn't looking. She found herself braiding her hair every morning, pulling the straw-colored strands tight, as if armoring herself. He had started calling her Clara, not you or Mrs. Mercer. The world was changing. In May, a traveling merchant named Phineas Cole rolled his wagon into the yard. He was a link to the outside, a purveyor of news, gossip, and supplies. He was a large, jovial man with a wet mouth and small, assessing eyes. Eli was in the barn, settling the account. Clara was helping unload sacks of flour and coffee. "Well now, Mr. Cole said, leaning against the wagon. He took a piece of tobacco and tucked it in his cheek. "You must be the new Mrs. Mercer." "I am," Clara said, not meeting his eyes, grabbing a sack of sugar. "Heard Mercer bought himself a wife from Kansas. Paid a pretty price, too. I hear, though, begging your pardon, pretty ain't the word I'd have chosen." Clara froze, her hands tight on the sack. Cole laughed. A thick, phlegmy sound. "Oh, no offense, little lady. Honesty's my trade, same as supplies. Surprised to see you out here, though. A man like Mercer, with all his problems. You'd think he'd keep his new purchase inside." He sidled closer, lowering his voice. "Must get lonely out here. A big, quiet house. A big, quiet man. A woman like you. You might be in need of some friendly conversation." He reached out and laid a damp, heavy hand on her arm. Get your hand off her." The voice was not a rumble. It was a flat, cold sheet of ice. Eli was standing at the corner of the barn, not 10 feet away. His hands were empty. His face was still. Phineas Cole's smile faltered. He let go of Clara's arm, but tried to recover. "Now, Mercer, just being neighborly, admiring your wife. She's a hard worker. Credit to you." Eli took 2 slow steps forward. He did not look at Clara. He did not look at the wagon. He looked at Phineas Cole's face. "You are not my neighbor," Eli said, "and you will not speak her name. Now, see here." Cole blustered, puffing his chest. "There's no call for—" The violence was a thing of pure, economical speed. Eli's right hand shot out, not in a wide, brawling swing, but a short, hard jab. It connected with Cole's nose. There was a sickening, wet crunch of cartilage and bone. Cole screamed, a high, thin sound, and collapsed into the dust, blood pouring from his face. Eli stood over him, breathing evenly. "Take your goods. Get off my land." He looked at the merchant's driver, who was frozen on the wagon seat. "Get him out of here. If I ever see his face again, I will bury him on that hill." He turned, his gaze sweeping past Clara, and strode back into the barn. Clara stood rooted to the spot, her heart hammering against her ribs so hard she thought it would break. The sugar sack was still in her arms. She was shaking. She had never seen a man defended. She had never seen such violence in her name. She was terrified, and she was in awe. That night, the house was a tomb again, but a different kind. It was the silence of a held breath, of a lightning strike. They ate their supper. He sat at one end, she at the other. The 20 feet of wood between them felt like a mile. Neither spoke. He ate his food, his face granite, the knuckles on his right hand raw and split. After the meal, he retreated to his study. She retreated to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed for an hour, maybe 2. The moon rose, filling her room with pale, ghostly light. She heard the clock downstairs strike 9. He hit a man. For her. He had called her my wife and defended her name. He had bought her. He had ignored her. He had protected her. She was trembling. Not from cold, not from fear. It was something else, a terrible, aching need, a need to understand, a need to break the final silence. She stood. Her bare feet made no sound on the wooden floor. She walked out of her room, down the dark hallway, to his door. It was closed. A thin line of lamplight shone from beneath it. She raised her hand. It was shaking. She knocked. 1, 2, 3, small, trembling raps. The light disappeared as his shadow fell on the crack. The bolt slid back. The door opened. He stood there. He was in his shirt sleeves, his braces hanging down. He was not surprised. He looked as if he had been waiting. His face was dark, his eyes burning in the shadows. They did not speak. Words were for contracts, for apologies, for merchants. This was something else. She stepped over the threshold, into his room. It was the first time. It smelled of him, old books, whiskey, and the faint, clean scent of lye soap. She looked at him. Her chin was high, but her body was vibrating with fear and a terrible, dawning hunger. Slowly, her hands went to the buttons of her plain, workday dress. Her fingers were clumsy, shaking so badly she could barely work the first button. He did not move. He did not help her. He just watched, his face carved from stone, his eyes never leaving hers. The dress pooled at her feet. She stood before him in her thin cotton shift. It was worn, mended, and pathetic. It did nothing to hide the plainness of her body, the sharp angles of her ribs, the small, pale scars of her former life. She was scarred. She was trembling. He moved. One step closed the distance between them. His calloused, damaged hand came up, not to her face, but to her shoulder. He grasped the thin strap of her shift. He did not caress. He held. His gaze dropped from her eyes to her mouth. Their first time was not gentle. It was not a romance. It was a collision. It was desperate and wordless and clumsy with a hunger that had been starving for a lifetime. It was the raw, aching shame of being sold, and the furious, defiant pride of being defended. It was his need to possess the one thing that had not recoiled from him, and her need to be wanted by the one man who had ever seen her. It was a clumsy, desperate tangle on the bearskin rug, because neither of them could wait for the bed. It was a battle, a surrender, a claiming. Afterward, in the sudden, ringing silence, he pulled her up. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, and carried her to the bed. He laid her down, and then, for the first time, he was gentle. He lay beside her, pulling the quilt over them both, and then he did what she had never, in her wildest, most secret imaginings, thought he would do. He held her. He pulled her against his chest, a hard, warm wall of muscle and scar tissue. His arm wrapped around her, strong and sure, holding her as if she were something precious. It was this simple act of holding, that broke her. The dam of 19 years of being unwanted, of being a burden, of being plain, broke. She wept, not the quiet, hidden tears she had cried into her pillow. She sobbed, great, gasping, tearing sounds of a lifetime of grief pouring out. She wept in his arms, her face buried in his chest. He did not shush her. He did not speak. He just held her, his hand moving to the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her loose, straw-colored hair. He held her as if he could absorb the pain, as if he could shield her from the world that had made her cry. When the sobs finally quieted into shudders, he tilted her chin up. In the moonlight, his face was a mystery of shadow and light. He leaned down, and he kissed her closed, swollen eyelids, one after the other, tasting the salt of her tears. Something between them, the hard, cold contract of their marriage, cracked. It shattered, like ice in the spring, and the sound of it breaking was the only sound in the room. The world had cracked open, and the light that came in was blinding. They were no longer two separate, silent people in a large, empty house. They were a man and a woman who shared a bed. This new reality was as fragile as a robin's egg, and Clara spent her days terrified it would break. The routines of the ranch continued, but the space between them had changed. The 20 feet of the dining table had vanished. They now ate at the small kitchen table, their knees sometimes brushing. The silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the shared knowledge of the night. He would pass her the salt, his fingers grazing hers, and a jolt would pass through her that was stronger than any lightning. But the ranch was an island. The world, the one that had discarded her and the one that had broken him, was still out there, and they were low on flour, salt, and coffee. "We need to go to town," Eli said one morning. Clara's stomach tightened. Town? She had not been to town since the day she'd arrived. She had not faced other people, other women. I can make a list," she offered, her voice small. Eli looked at her over the rim of his coffee cup. His eyes, one clear, one slightly clouded by the pull of his scar, assessed her. "No, you will come. You are the mistress of this ranch. You will choose your own supplies." It was a command, but it was also a statement. You are the mistress. The ride in the wagon was quiet, but tense. Eli sat straight, the reins in his hands, his face set in the grim lines he wore for the outside world. Clara sat beside him, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. She wore her mended homespun, the best she had. She had braided her hair with extra care, but she knew it was still the color of straw, her face still plain. The town was a shock. After the endless, quiet expanse of the Mercer Range, the noise and bustle of the single dirt street felt like an assault. There were a dozen buildings, a hotel, a smithy, a bank, and the general store. People milled about, and every single one of them, it seemed, stopped to stare at the Mercer wagon. They stared at Eli, a man they clearly respected and feared, and then their eyes slid to Clara. She felt the weight of their gazes like stones. She heard the whispers begin before her feet even touched the ground. Eli helped her down, his hand firm on her elbow. An impersonal gesture, but she saw the looks exchanged. Inside the general store, The air was thick with the smells of new cloth, tobacco, and dried apples, and gossip. "That's her," a woman in a gray bonnet whispered to another, not bothering to lower her voice much. "Mercer's mail-order bride. From Kansas, I heard bought and paid for. Goodness. She's plain as a post. You'd think with all his money." Clara's face burned. She kept her eyes on the floor, on the list that was shaking in her hand. She wanted to run, to hide in the wagon, to be back in the silent, safe kitchen. "Can I help you, Mrs. Mercer?" The storekeep was polite, but his eyes were curious, assessing her value. I need flour, and, well, if it isn't the new queen of the Mercer Ranch." The voice was high and sharp, like breaking glass. Clara turned. A young woman, perhaps Clara's age but looking like a creature from a different world, stood there. She was dressed in a green traveling suit with a bustle, her hair dark and perfect, her face pretty and cruel. She was flanked by two other, plainer young women, who looked at her with admiration. "I'm Amelia Vance," the woman said, as if Clara should have known. "My father is Mr. Vance, at the bank." She looked Clara up and down. A slow, insulting appraisal. "I must say, I'm surprised to see you out. We had all heard Mr. Mercer was particular, but I suppose when one is buying sight unseen, one must take what one is given." The two women with her tittered. The store went quiet. Clara felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her cold and sick. She had no answer. She had never learned to fight with words. She had only learned to endure. "Amelia." Eli's voice cut through the store. He had been at the back, speaking with the owner about feed. Now, he walked forward. He was not fast, but every step was heavy with menace. The room, which had been quiet, became utterly still. Amelia Vance's smile faltered, but she held her ground, a spoiled creature unused to being crossed. "Mr. Mercer, I was just welcoming your wife to town." Eli stopped. He did not look at Amelia. He did not look at the store key. He looked at Clara. He saw her. He saw her shame, her trembling, the way she was trying to make herself small, to disappear. His face, which had been granite, softened for an instant. A flash of something so private and fierce it stunned her. Then, in front of the banker's daughter, in front of the gossips, in front of the entire town, Eli Mercer reached out his large, scarred hand. He did not grab her elbow. He did not pull her away. He took her hand. He laced his fingers through hers. A firm, possessive, and undeniable gesture. He was not touching her as property. He was holding her as a partner. The whole room went quiet. The sound of a fly buzzing against the window was suddenly loud. Amelia Vance's pretty face turned an ugly, mottled red. Eli turned his head, his gaze finally falling on the banker's daughter. He said nothing. He did not need to. He simply looked at her, his scarred face a promise of consequences, his hand holding Clara's as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Then, still holding her hand, he turned back to the storekeep. "Add a bolt of that blue calico to my wife's order, and 2 dresses. Whatever she wants, put it on my account." He pulled her gently toward the cloth. "Choose," he said, his voice a low rumble just for her. She was shaking, but she pointed, her finger trembling, at the blue calico she had found in the chest. "That one, please." He nodded. He did not let go of her hand for the entire rest of the time they were in the store. He did not let go as they walked out, past the stunned gossips. He only let go to lift her into the wagon. The ride home was as silent as the ride in, but the silence was different. It was not cold. It was not empty. It was a vibrating, powerful thing. Clara sat beside him, her hands in her own lap, but she could still feel the imprint of his hold, the rough warmth of his calluses against her skin. They did not speak of it. They reached the ranch, unhitched the team, and put the supplies away. The new bolt of blue cloth sat on the kitchen table like a trophy. Clara started making supper. Her hands were still shaking. She was kneading bread, her movements jerky, Eli was in the corner, cleaning a piece of a bridle, the scent of leather oil filling the room. "You missed a spot." His voice startled her. She looked at her bread, confused. "What?" "Right there." He walked over, his boots quiet on the floor. He stood behind her, so close she could feel the heat of his body. He pointed not at the bread, but at her cheek, where a dusting of flour sat. He was so close. She turned her head, looking up at him. His face was unreadable in the dimming light. "Thank you," she whispered. In the store, they will not speak to you that way." He said. It was a statement of fact, like the sun rising. "Eli," she said, testing his name. Hush." He was still for a long moment. Then, his rough thumb, the one stained with the leather oil, came up and brushed the flour from her cheek. His touch was hesitant, as if he were handling a wild bird. He looked at the smudge of flour on his thumb. A small, strange, almost smile quirked the good side of his mouth. "You are a mess, darlin'." The word hung in the air. Darlin'. It was rough, unpracticed, as if he had pulled it from a deep, dusty chest. He had not called her that in the night. He had called her that now, in the light, over bread and bridal bits. Clara stared at him. A bubble of something she did not recognize rose in her chest. It was hot and light, and it pushed past her lips before she could stop it. She laughed. It was not a titter or a giggle. It was a real, free, unpracticed laugh, a sound she had not made since she was a small child, if ever. It was a rusty, joyous sound that filled the kitchen. Eli's face changed. The small smile faded, replaced by a look of pure, stunned wonder. He looked at her as if she had just performed a miracle. He had never heard her laugh. The sound of it startled her into silence. She clapped a hand over her mouth, her eyes wide. He slowly, truly, smiled. "There," he rumbled, his voice thick. "That is better." Life began. It was not the life she had imagined, full of romance from a storybook. It was a life of work, but now it was shared work. "The hens are useless," he declared one evening. "A fox has been at them. They need a proper coop." I do not know how to build," she said. "But I do," he said. "And you will learn." They built it together. He taught her how to measure timber, how to use a hammer without bending the nail. She was a quick learner, her movements precise. He would stand behind her, his large hands guiding hers on the saw. Let the tool do the work. "Clara, do not force it." She would be intensely aware of his chest at her back, his breath stirring her hair. They worked in an easy, companionable silence. And at the end of a week, they had a small, sturdy building, safe from any fox. He taught her to shoot. "This is not a land for the helpless," he said, pulling a Winchester rifle from his cabinet. It was heavy, the wood smooth, the barrel cold and smelling of oil. He took her out to the pasture. "Stand here," he positioned her, his hands on her shoulders, turning her body. "Plant your feet, lean into it. This thing has a kick, respect it." He placed the butt of the rifle against her shoulder, his hand settling over hers on the stock. "Look down the sight, breathe out, and squeeze. Do not pull." She was terrified of the noise, of the power, but she did as he said. She breathed out, focused on a distant fence post, and squeezed. The explosion was deafening, the kick a hard slam against her shoulder, but the top of the fence post splintered. She turned, her eyes wide. Eli looked at the post, then at her. A slow look of approval, almost of pride, settled on his face. "Again?" She stitched a quilt. She had the new blue calico, and the scraps from the curtains, and she even cut a square from her one remaining Kansas dress. Tucked in her sewing box, she found a piece of a dark woolen shirt, one of his torn and discarded. She cut a square of that, too. She worked on it at night by the fire while he sat in his chair, reading a ledger or oiling his saddle. He would watch her, his eyes tracking the needle's flash. She was stitching their lives together, mending the torn pieces, making something new and warm. When it was done, She spread it on the bed they now shared. It was rough and patchwork, but it was theirs. The mail rider came once a month. He usually brought ledgers, ranching gazettes, or notices from the Stockmen's Association. But one hot day in July, he brought a letter. Clara took it. The postmark was from Kansas. Her name was not on it. It was addressed to Mr. Eli Mercer. Her blood went cold. She gave it to him at supper. He looked at the postmark, his face expressionless. He opened it. His eyes scanned the page, and his face, which had been softening for weeks, hardened into the granite mask she remembered. A muscle in his jaw, the one by the scar, began to jump. "What is it?" she whispered. He did not answer. He kept reading. She could see the cramped, angry handwriting from across the table. "Eli?" He finished the letter. He crumpled it in his fist. He stood. He walked to the cookstove, opened the firebox, and threw the wadded paper into the flames. "Eli, what was it?" she pleaded, following him. He turned, his eyes black. "Your father." My father? "He feels," Eli said, his voice a low, dangerous growl, "that the 5 heifers were not sufficient payment. He says raising a daughter is an expensive business. He is demanding money, cash, or he says he will come here and reclaim his property." Clara felt as if he had punched her in the stomach. Reclaim. Property. She stumbled back, falling into a chair. The shame, the worthlessness. It was all there, fresh and raw. He cannot. "He will not," Eli stated. He watched the paper curl and blacken in the fire. "It is done. The debt is paid." She stared at his back, this tall, scarred, implacable man. He had burned it. He had not argued or negotiated. He had simply erased it. He had erased her past. She stood up, her legs unsteady. She walked to him. She could not speak. She put her hand on his arm. He was rigid, trembling with a fury she had never seen. He put his hand over hers. "No one," he said, his voice low, "will ever call you property again." She put her head against his back, her silent thanks more powerful than any words. The past, however, was not only in Kansas. It was in Helena. Annabelle, the woman who had left him, had come back to the territory. She was visiting family in Bozeman, and she heard the news. Eli Mercer, the hermit, the monster, had married. She was a woman who fed on drama and cruelty. She rode into town, dressed in silks, and she saw Clara. She saw the plain face, the homespun dress, the way the woman walked with her head down, and she smelled weakness. Annabelle did not need to lie. She only needed to tell the truth. She sat in the hotel parlor, the center of attention. "Oh, it is a tragedy, is it not?" she said, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "He bought her. My father's man heard it from a trader. Jedediah, I think his name was, in Kansas. Sold his own daughter for livestock. Can you imagine? Eli is not married. He has purchased a servant. It is just so sad. For the poor, plain little thing." The rumor spread faster than a prairie fire. It was worse than the gossip about a mail-order bride. This was a scandal. She was not a wife. She was a slave. She was bought. Eli heard it from his own men. His foreman, a grizzled man named Silas, approached him at the corral, his hat in his hands. "Mr. Mercer, I hate to, but the talk in town, it's bad. They're saying..." Eli did not need him to finish. He just nodded, his face pale. He got on his horse and rode back to the ranch, his mind a cold, dark place. He found Clara in the chicken coop they had built. She was gathering eggs, humming a small, tuneless song, a sound he had come to associate with her being content. He stood in the doorway, blocking the afternoon sun. "Clara," he said. His voice was not his. It was flat, dead. She turned, a smile on her face. The smile died when she saw him. "Eli, what is it? You look ill." "Annabelle is in town," he said. She did not know the name. "Who?" "The woman," he said. "The one, before." "Oh." Clara's hands tightened on the egg basket. "She is telling stories," he said, his voice still empty. "That your father sold you, that you are not my wife, that you are..." A purchase. He looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was so deep it was a physical thing. She is telling the truth, is not she? Clara's blood ran cold. The eggs, the coop, the quilt, all of it disappeared. She was back in Kansas, a burden, a thing to be sold. She said he was paid 5 heifers, and his debt was cleared. Clara's shame was a suffocating blanket. She could not breathe. She could not lie. Not to him, not now. The egg basket slipped from her fingers. It shattered on the floor, a mess of straw and broken shells. Yes, she whispered. He closed his eyes, just for a second, but it was enough. I did not know, she stammered, the tears coming, hot and fast. Not until he told me. He said I was plain, that Rosalie was the pretty one. He said I was a burden, and this Mr. Mercer was willing to take me. I did not know it was a sale, not until you said it was a contract. I am sorry, Eli. I am so sorry. She was sobbing now, her whole body shaking, confessing it all. I thought I was nothing. I thought that was all I was worth. 5 heifers. I am sorry. She waited for the rejection. She waited for him to tell her to pack, to leave. She had shamed him. She was the plain, bought thing the town all said she was. He did not move for a full minute. He just stood there, a shadow against the light. Then he moved. He crossed the small coop in 2 strides. He did not yell. He did not rage. He grabbed her. He pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her like steel bands, crushing her to him. He buried his face in her hair, his whole body trembling with a terrible, silent fury. Eli, she choked, her face pressed against his shirt. Hush, he commanded, his voice a raw, broken thing. He held her, just held her, until her sobs quieted. He tilted her face up, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were burning. Do you think I care about 5 heifers? He whispered, his voice fierce. Do you think I care about your father? Or Annabelle? Or that whole damned town? He put his scarred hand on her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear. I was dead, he said, his voice cracking. For 6 years, I was a dead man in a house of ghosts. I was nothing but scars and wire, and then you came. He pressed his forehead against hers. This land, it is just dirt. The house is just timber. It is all nothing. You, he pulled back, his eyes locked on hers. You are the only thing that's ever felt real to me. He held her face in his hands. Clara, you are not what they bought. You are what I found. She stared at him, her heart aching, her body trembling with a new, fragile belief. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, hungry kiss of their first night. It was not the chaste peck of a husband. It was a promise. It was a vow. It was a slow, fierce devotion. A kiss that said, you are mine, and I am yours, and to hell with the rest of the world. He lifted her, his arms strong, and carried her out of the ruined coop, past the shattered eggs. He carried her back to the house, to their room, to the bed with the patchwork quilt. That night, they made love. It was not a collision. It was a prayer. It was slow and deep and healing. He worshipped her plain body with his hands, his mouth, his scars, until she trembled not with shame, but with belief. He kissed her, and his kiss promised forever. And for the first time in her 19 years, Clara Mercer believed it. The rumor, once a quiet poison, was now a public spectacle. But Eli had been right. They were not 2 separate people. They were a single thing, a single truth, and they would face the world as one. The following Sunday, he did not ask her to go to town. He told her, we are going to church, he said, buttoning a clean white shirt. It was not a request. Eli, they will stare. They will talk. The memory of Amelia Vance's sneer, of Annabelle's cruel, carried words, was a fresh wound. Let them talk. He walked to her, took her chin in his hand, his thumb resting on the pulse that beat there. You are Clara Mercer. You are my wife. You will not hide, and you will not cower. Not anymore. The walk into the small, sun-baked church was the longest of Clara's life. The music from the wheezing organ stopped, the shuffling of feet, the whispers, all of it ceased. It was a vacuum of silence, heavy and suffocating. Clara felt the pull, the familiar urge to drop her gaze, to shrink, to become the plain, invisible thing she had always been. But Eli's hand was at the small of her back, a firm, hot, unmovable weight. It was not a cage. It was a support. Pastor Davies, a man whose piety was secondary to his fear of social discomfort, met them at the aisle. He wrung his hands. "Mr. Mercer, good to see you. And your—" Eli's voice did not raise. It did not need to. It was a low, resonant sound that filled the entire building. "Pastor, I would like to formally introduce my wife, Clara Mercer." He said it with pride, not with defiance, not with anger, but with a simple, profound pride that stunned the onlookers. He was not presenting a contract or an explanation. He was presenting his wife, Amelia Vance, in the front pew. Looked as if she had been slapped. Eli's hand on Clara's back guided her forward. He did not look at the gossips. His eyes were on her. He was waiting. Clara felt a sudden, strange stillness inside. The fear was there, but it was no longer in control. He had given her his name. He had given her his bed. He had given her his truth. She would not shame his pride. She lifted her chin. She looked the pastor directly in the eye, her own muddy gaze clear and steady. "Good morning, Pastor," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not tremble. They sat in the Mercer pew, the one his father had built, the one that had been empty for 6 years. And when the service was over, Eli stood by the door, his hand on her back, and introduced her, one by one, to every person who tried to scuttle past. "My wife, Clara. Have you met my wife, Clara?" He was helping her find her voice by giving her his. That small, fragile seed of confidence began to grow. The house, his house, began to feel like their home. The 5 hands on the ranch, the grizzled foreman, Silas, the young, eager Tom, the quiet twins Abe and Isaac, and the grumpy bunkhouse cook, Cookie, were still distant. They were his men. They respect the ranch, Eli told her one evening, watching her stitch a new patch on his work trousers. But a ranch needs more than a boss. It needs a heart. They are good men. They deserve a good meal. I cannot cook for all of them," she protested. "Not every day, but Sunday." So she began. The first Sunday was a trial. She made 3 venison stews, an ocean of beans, and a mountain of cornbread. The men filed in, hats clutched in their hands, their faces scrubbed, their boots loud on her clean kitchen floor. They sat at the long, imposing dining table, the one she and Eli had long since abandoned, and ate in a silence that was almost as loud as the church's. They ate everything, every single scrap. The next Sunday, she roasted 3 chickens. It was a luxury. Cookie, the old sour cook, took a bite. He chewed for a long, critical minute. He looked at her, his eyes assessing. "It ain't half bad. Ma'am, the gravy. It needs more pepper, but it ain't slop, which is more than I can say for my own." A week later, young Tom, the brave one, approached her at the well, his hat twisting in his hands. "Ma'am, Mrs. Mercer, the men were wondering. My ma, back in Illinois, she used to make an apple pie. A deep one. We'd be mighty grateful." Clara looked at his hopeful, sunburnt face. She looked at Eli, who was watching from the porch, a small, satisfied smile on his face. "I can," she said, and her own smile felt new and strange. "I will need more apples from town." She was no longer just his wife. She was becoming the mistress of the Mercer Ranch. She was the woman who brought pie and clean stitches and a quiet warmth to a place that had only known work and dust. Her strength, however, was forged in a crisis that had nothing to do with pie. It came in late summer, with a storm that turned the sky a violent, bruised purple. The rain did not fall. It was thrown. Solid sheets of water that turned the yard into a river of mud. In the middle of the night, A pounding came on their door, a sound of pure, frantic panic. Eli grabbed his rifle, but Clara, her heart leaping, knew it was not violence. It was terror. She opened the door. A young man, barely 20, was on the porch, soaked to the skin, his face a mask of tears. It was Daniel Gideon, a new homesteader from a small, struggling claim 10 miles south. "Mr. Mercer," he sobbed, clutching the doorframe. "It's Mary. It's my wife. The baby. It's coming. It's too soon. And it's coming wrong. The midwife's in Bozeman. I don't know what to do. Please, she's dying." Eli looked at Clara. His memory was sharp. He remembered a barn, a breeched calf, and her small, steady hands. Clara did not hesitate. She was already moving. "Eli, hitch the buggy, the fast one. Daniel, get back to your wife. We will be right behind you." "Clara," Eli started. The storm was a living thing outside. "Now, Eli!" She was in his study, grabbing the bottle of laudanum, the carbolic, the clean cloths. She was not the plain, shrinking girl from Kansas. She was not the silent, contractual wife. She was a woman with a purpose. The ride was a nightmare. The buggy skidded in the mud. The wind tore at them, but Eli drove the horses with a desperate, focused skill. The Gideon homestead was barely a shack, a sodden timber lean-to that looked as if it would be washed away by morning. Inside, Mary Gideon was screaming. She was a child herself, her body rigid with pain and terror. Clara took one look and her stomach dropped. It was bad. "Daniel, Eli, go," she commanded. "I need all the hot water you can boil, and every clean rag you have, and then you wait outside. Go." The men, grateful to be given orders, fled. Clara knelt by the rope bed. Mary, look at me." She took the girl's hand. "My name is Clara Mercer. I am here to help you. I delivered a calf this spring that was breeched. This is the same. Do you understand? I will not leave you." The girl's eyes, wide with panic, focused on her. She nodded, clinging to Clara's hand. It was a long, terrible, bloody night. It was a battle. Clara's arms ached, her back screamed. The shack was hot, filled with the smell of blood and fear. Twice, she thought she had lost both of them. But she remembered Eli's voice in the barn, gently, with the mother. Now, she was not a doctor. She was not a midwife. She was just a woman who had been told she was worthless, who now refused to let another life be the same. Just as the bruised gray light of dawn broke through the small window, a thin, weak, furious cry filled the room. Clara sat back on her heels, covered in sweat and blood, shaking so hard she could barely breathe. A small, perfect, messy baby boy was wailing in her hands. Mary was weeping, not in pain, but in pure, exhausted relief. Clara cleaned the child, wrapped him, and laid him in his mother's arms. She stood, her knees cracking. She stumbled to the door and pushed it open. Daniel Gideon and Eli were sitting on the porch, two still, dark shapes in the rain. They stood as she emerged. Daniel looked at her, his face a ruin of fear. "You have a son," Clara said, her voice a dry rasp. "He is small, but he is loud, and your wife is sleeping." The young homesteader crumpled. He fell to his knees in the mud, sobbing, and grabbed Clara's filthy, blood-caked hand. He kissed it. "Mrs. Mercer," he wept. "Mrs. Mercer, God bless you. I thought you are so strong." Clara went still. Strong. He had not said she was kind. He had not said she was helpful. He had said she was strong. She looked at Eli, whose face, in the gray light, was filled with a look of such reverent awe that it stole her breath. But the respect she had earned was a light that attracted darkness. Not everyone was happy to see the Mercer ranch, and the Mercer marriage, thrive. Amos Gray was a bitter man. His ranch, which bordered the Mercer land to the south, had been in his family for as long as Eli's, but where the Mercers had prospered, the Grays had failed. Amos Gray blamed the Mercers for his every misfortune, for the dry weather, for the low price of cattle, for his own bad choices. He and Eli's father had feuded over a water rights line for 20 years. Eli had inherited the feud along with the land. Gray saw Eli's new happiness, his public pride in his wife, as an insult, and he saw Clara's rising reputation as a threat. He found his moment in town, outside the bank. Eli and Clara were in their wagon, loading supplies. Amos Gray, drunk at 10 in the morning, blocked their path. "Well, well, Mercer," Gray bellowed, his voice carrying across the street. "Getting awful high and mighty, aren't you?" Eli's face went hard. He stepped in front of Clara. "Amos, you're drunk. Go home." "I'll go home when I'm good and ready," Gray spat. "I see what you're doing. I see this whole sham. You think you're clever. I have no idea what you're talking about. This," Gray waved a hand at the wagon, "at Clara. This marriage. You're encroaching on my south pasture, claiming the creek bed, and now you bring this woman, this bought woman, to file new claims. You're trying to use a sham marriage to steal my land. You think you can build a legacy by grabbing land and pretending you have a wife?" The street went dead silent. Bought woman. Sham marriage. The words hung in the air, sharp and ugly. Eli's hand dropped to the pistol on his hip. His voice was a low, deadly promise. "Amos, you have 10 seconds to apologize to my wife." "Wife," Gray laughed. A high, ugly sound. "That ain't no wife. That's a Kansas field hand you bought for 5 cows. You ain't no better than a pimp, Mercer. And she ain't no better than a—" Before Eli could move, before the gun could clear the holster, Clara stood up in the wagon. Her entire body was trembling, but her voice, the voice she had used to calm a screaming woman in labor, cut through the air. "He is my husband, Mr. Gray." Amos Gray stopped, his mouth open. The entire street was staring at her. "And this ranch is my home," Clara continued, her voice gaining strength, fueled by a pure, white-hot fury she had never known she possessed. "You speak of things you do not understand. My husband is an honorable man. You are a drunk, and you are a coward." Amos Gray's face turned a shade of purple. He was stunned into silence, not by Eli's threat, but by the quiet, plain woman who had just called him a coward. Eli himself was frozen, his hand still on his gun, staring at his wife in pure, unadulterated shock. Clara sat down, her legs giving way beneath her. Gray sputtered, his drunken rage deflating, and he stalked away, defeated by a 19-year-old woman's words. Eli slowly got into the wagon. He took the reins. His hands were shaking. He did not speak. They were halfway home, the prairie grass whispering around them. When he pulled the wagon to a complete stop, he turned and looked at her. He just looked for a full minute. His face was a raw mix of emotions, shock, pride, and a love so fierce it was almost violent. You spoke," he said, his voice hoarse. "He insulted you," she whispered, still trembling from the adrenaline. "He insulted us," Eli corrected, his voice thick. He reached out, not to touch her, but just to let his fingers hover near her face. "You, Clara, you are a marvel." He turned and clicked the reins, and they drove home. The victory was short-lived. Amos Gray was a coward, but a coward, when cornered, is a snake. A week later, Eli was checking the far pastures. The wires had been cut, just as he'd feared. He was riding the line near the creek bed, the moon a pale sliver in the sky. "This ain't your land, Mercer." The voice came from the darkness. Before Eli could even turn his horse, 3 men were on him. It was not a fair fight. It was an ambush. He recognized Amos Gray's voice, snarling and ugly. He felt the first blow, a shovel handle, to his back, knocking him from the horse. He hit the ground. The air punched from his lungs. He drew his pistol, but a boot smashed his wrist, and the gun went skittering into the dark. "This is for my father!" Gray screamed, kicking him. "This is for the water, and this is for your bought whore!" The last blow was a heavy, dull impact to the side of his head. And then, nothing. In the ranch house, Clara waited. The clock struck midnight, Then one, then two. The wind howled, a mournful, empty sound that clawed at her nerves. He had said he would be back. She could not stand it. She lit a lantern, threw on Eli's heavy sheepskin coat, and ran to the barn. His horse was gone, but her mare was there. She was about to saddle the horse, her mind frantic, when she heard it, a sound, half human, half animal, a terrible, scraping groan. Eli? She ran, her heart stopping. The lantern light was a wild, bouncing circle. She found him by the corral. He must have crawled. He must have crawled for a mile, his body broken, pulling himself home to her. He was a ruin, a bloody, muddy, unrecognizable mass. His face was a swollen horror, his shirt a dark, wet red. "Eli!" she screamed, dropping the lantern. He opened one eye, a sliver of white in the bloody mask. "Clara!" he gurgled, a bubble of blood on his lips. "Gray, 3 of them." He tried to lift his hand, and then he went limp. Her scream tore through the night. The bunkhouse door burst open. Silas, Tom, the twins. They ran out, rifles in hand, expecting an attack. They found her, a small, frantic creature, trying to lift a man who weighed twice what she did. "He's alive!" she shrieked. "Help me! Get him inside! Silas, ride! Ride to Bozeman! Get the doctor! Kill the horse! I do not care! But you get him!" Silas took one look and ran for the stable. The other men lifted Eli, their faces grim, and carried him to the house, to their bed. She cut the clothes from him. He was worse than she could have imagined. His ribs were broken. A deep gash in his side was weeping blood. His face, she turned away, vomiting into a bucket. Then she went to work. She washed him. She stitched the gash, her fingers, which had saved a baby, now fighting to save her husband. The needlework was crude, but it was strong. She bound his ribs. She cleaned his face. And then the fever started. For 8 days, he was not there. He was in a dark place, a world of pain and shouting. He thrashed, his strong body fighting invisible demons. He called for his father. He cursed Amos Gray, and he called for her. "Clara," he would moan, his voice a dry, cracked rasp. "Clara, keep her safe. They can't have her. Mine. I am here," she whispered, her voice raw from weeping. She did not sleep. She sat in the chair beside the bed, wiping his face, forcing water and broth between his lips. "I am here. Eli, I am not leaving you." The ranch, however, did not wait. On the 3rd day, she emerged from the sick room, her eyes swollen, her hair a wild, uncombed mess. The men were in the kitchen, lost. "Ma'am?" young Tom said, his voice hesitant. The fence. It's still down. Gray's cattle are all over the south pasture." Clara looked at him. Her husband was dying. Her home was under attack. She was alone. The plain girl from Kansas was gone. The quiet wife was gone. A general took her place. "Tom," she said, her voice clear and cold, "you and the twins will ride the line. You will cut our herd from his. You will repair the fence. You will carry your rifles. But you will not fire unless fired upon. Do you understand me? We will not start a war. We will just win." Tom's jaw dropped. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Cookie," she said. "You will make the strongest coffee you can, and you will keep it coming. I will be in the sick room." She ran the ranch from that chair. She gave orders, she checked ledgers, and she nursed her husband. The town, which had first whispered, then respected, now came to help. It was not Mr. Mercer they came for. He was a recluse, a man of scars. They came for her, Mrs. Davies, the pastor's wife, arrived with a pot of good, thick soup. Amelia Vance's father, the banker, sent 2 of his own men to assist with the fence. A clear, public message to Amos Gray, Mary Gideon's husband. Daniel showed up one morning, sat on the porch with his rifle, and said, "Just keeping watch, ma'am." The doctor finally arrived. After being gone for a week on a call, he looked at Eli, who was pale and weak, but breathing. He looked at the clean stitches, the bound ribs, the way the fever had finally broken. He's alive, the doctor said, stunned. His skull is intact. I do not understand it. He should be dead. He looked at Clara, at her exhausted, dirt-streaked face. It's you, Mrs. Mercer. You're nursing. You saved him. He's a strong man, but you are stronger. 2 nights later, the fever was gone. Eli was sleeping. A true, healing sleep. Clara was in the chair, her body a single, dull ache. She had finally fallen asleep, her head dropping onto the mattress, her hand still holding his. She felt a squeeze, a weak, but definite squeeze. She jerked awake, her heart pounding. Eli was looking at her. His eyes, one clear, one scarred, were open, and they were his eyes. Eli, she choked, the tears coming, hot and fast. You're a mess, he whispered. His voice was a bare rasp. His lips cracked. She laughed, a broken, sobbing sound. So are you. He looked at her, truly looked at her. He saw the dirt under her fingernails, the dark circles under her eyes, the matted, undone straw of her hair. He saw the woman who had faced down his rival, who had run his ranch, and who had refused to let him die. He lifted his hand, the one she was holding, and his thumb brushed her raw knuckles. I'd marry you again, he whispered, his voice thick. She leaned closer, pressing her ear to his mouth, terrified she had misheard. What? I'd marry you again, he said, a fraction stronger. With no deal, no land, no shame. He took a ragged, painful breath. Just love. I'd marry you just for love. Clara. She kissed him. It was the kiss of the reborn. It was the taste of salt and fever and survival. It was not the start of their story. It was the start of their life. The world returned to him slowly. First, it was just the pain, a dull, thudding ocean of it. Then, sound, the whisper of a cloth, the low murmur of a voice that was not his own, but was his anchor. Then, finally, sight, the patchwork quilt she had made, and her face, dirt-streaked and exhausted, her head pillowed on his mattress, her hand holding his. Eli's recovery was a new season on the ranch. It was slow and frustrating, and measured not in days, but in small, hard-won victories. The day he sat up, the day he stood, his legs trembling, his weight leaning on her small, strong shoulder. The day, a month after the ambush, that she helped him into a simple wooden chair. The sun, he'd rasped, his voice still rough. I want to see the sun. She had pushed the chair, which scraped and complained on the wooden floor, out onto the wide front porch. It was late afternoon. The sun, which had been a harsh, indifferent enemy, was now a healing balm, a low, golden thing that set the prairie grass on fire. Clara sat on the porch step at his feet, her arms wrapped around her knees. She was quiet, just watching the land. He watched her. He was a man who had built his life on fences, on barriers of barbed wire and scarred tissue, and he had been saved by a woman who had broken through every single one. You ran the ranch, he said. It was not a question. She looked up, her plain face soft in the evening light. It is our ranch. It needed running. You told me Tom and the twins cut Gray's herd from mine. They did. And Mr. Vance, he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. The banker sent his own men to help rebuild the fence. Yes. He's a snake. He would not do that for me. Clara turned to look at the fields, at the horizon that was turning a deep, bruised purple. He did not do it for you, Eli. He did it for me. The simple, unadorned truth of it settled between them. He, Eli Mercer, the reclusive, powerful, and feared man, had been helpless, and she, the plain, bought, invisible woman, had commanded the respect of the very people who had once scorned her. She had saved him, and she had saved his land. They sat in a comfortable, deep silence, a silence that had been earned through fire and blood. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of sage and distant pines. This land, Eli said, his voice quiet. My father, he broke himself on it. I just held it, but you. He looked at the south pasture, the new fence line she had ordered, gleaming in the last light. "You fought for it. You made it a home." He reached down, his hand, still weak, resting on her hair. It was no longer the color of straw to him. It was the color of the prairie in winter, of wheat, of the earth itself. "Clara," he said, his voice thick. "I am here," she whispered, leaning her cheek against his knee. We need more than a home. This place, it needs a future." She went still. "It needs an heir. Clara, not just a legal name, the way I told you, not a contract. It needs a child." She looked up, her eyes wide, and for the first time in a month, he saw a flicker of the old fear, the old worthlessness. "A child?" she breathed. "A son or a daughter, someone to pass this to, someone to build this for." Clara stood up, pulling away from him. She walked to the edge of the porch, her back to him. She was trembling. "Eli," she said, her voice so small it was almost lost to the wind. You do not know what you are asking." "I know exactly what I am asking," he said, his voice firm. "No." She wrapped her arms around herself. I never thought a woman like me." She choked on the words. "Plain, sold, a woman who was a burden. I never thought myself worthy of children, of a family. That was for pretty women, for girls like Rosalie, not for me." It was the last, deepest, darkest piece of her old life, the one shame she had not known how to voice, the belief that she was not just unwanted, but unworthy of creation. The scraping of the chair was a harsh, sudden sound. Eli was on his feet. He was unsteady, his body a map of pain, but he was standing. He crossed the few feet between them and put his hands on her shoulders, forcing her to turn. He was pale. His face was still a network of fading bruises, his scar a stark white against the purpled skin. But his eyes were clear, and they were burning with a fire that had nothing to do with fever. "Do not," he said, his voice a low, fierce growl. "Do not ever say that. Do not ever think it." He pulled her closer, his hands framing her face, his thumbs brushing the high, plain line of her cheekbones. "I do not want a pretty wife's child," he said, his voice raw. "I do not want Rosalie's child. I want your child." He touched his thumb to the corner of her eye, the one she had always thought was the color of mud. "I want your eyes in my son," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I want your courage. I want your quiet, your stillness. I want a child who knows how to fight, not with his fists, but with his heart. The way you do. I want a child who knows how to save a man, the way you saved me." She stared at him, the tears she had not shed for a month now streaming down her face. "You are not a burden, Clara," he said, pressing his forehead to hers. "You are my foundation." He kissed her, a kiss of pure, healing grace, and the last of the old, broken pieces of her soul finally, irrevocably, knit together. Joy returned. It was a cautious joy, but it was real. Eli began to walk, first with a cane, then, stubbornly, without one. His ribs ached, his wrist was stiff, but he was alive, and he was home. He and Clara were a new, strange, and wonderful thing. They were happy, they talked, they planned, they laughed, a sound that the old house had never heard, but the snake, though defeated, was not dead. The smell of the smoke woke Clara. It was not the familiar, comforting smell of the cook stove, but the acrid, chemical smell of a world on fire. She sat bolt upright in bed. "Eli, the smoke!" He was already moving, grabbing his trousers, his face a grim, pale mask. They ran outside into the pre-dawn light. The northern sky was a healthy, pale gray. The southern sky was hell. A pillar of black smoke was rising from the far pasture, the one that bordered Amos Gray. A sickening, blood-red glow pulsed at its base. "No," Eli breathed. It was not a word. It was a curse. He did not wait. He ran to the barn. Not to his horse, but to the cabinet where he kept his rifle. Clara was right behind him. "Eli, what?" "He's burning us out," Eli snarled, shoving cartridges into the weapon. "He could not kill me, so he will kill my land. He's killing my cattle." A terrible, lowing, screaming sound drifted on the wind, the sound of animals trapped by fire. Clara clapped her hands over her mouth, her stomach heaving. "He's a dead man," Eli said. His voice was flat, cold, and utterly devoid of the warmth she had come to know. The man who had held her, who had spoken of children, was gone. The scarred, cold recluse was back. He grabbed his saddle. "No," Clara said. He ignored her, throwing the saddle on his mare. "Eli, no!" She ran to him, grabbing his arm. The one holding the rifle. "You cannot. Get out of my way, Clara," he said, his voice deadly. "No, I will not. Look at you. You can barely stand. You're going to ride to his ranch and get yourself killed? He is burning our home. He is burning grass," she shrieked, her voice echoing in the barn. "It is just grass. Eli, the cattle. We can buy more cattle. We cannot buy you, not again. It is not about the grass," he growled, trying to push past her. "It is about the law. He tried to murder me. He failed. Now he does this. There is no law here but this one." He raised the rifle. She stood in front of him, planting her feet. She was shaking from head to foot, but she did not move. "Then you are no better than him," she whispered. He froze, his eyes, cold and black, locked with hers. "You are not a murderer, Eli Mercer," she said, her voice gaining strength, the same strength she had found in the church, in the street. "You are not a coward. He is. You go there with a gun, and you become him. You throw away everything you have built, everything I saved." She was crying, but her gaze was relentless. "He wants to bring you down to his level. Do not let him. Please, do not let him win." He stared at her, his chest heaving, his hands so tight on the rifle his knuckles were white. He was fighting a war, not with Gray, but with himself, with the old, broken man who solved problems with wire and silence and rage, slowly, agonizingly. His shoulders slumped, the killing cold in his eyes faded, replaced by a terrible, weary pain. He let the rifle drop, the barrel tipping to the dirt floor. He is burning my land," he whispered, his voice that of a broken child. Clara moved, taking the rifle from his hand, leaning it against the wall. She put her arms around his waist, her small body holding up his. "Yes," she said, her face pressed against his chest. "He is." "And we will stop him, but we will do this right. We will do this in the light, where everyone can see." He sagged against her, his strength, fueled by rage, finally gone. "How?" She pulled back, looking up at his face. "You said I saved the ranch. Now, you and we will save it." They did not go to Amos Gray. They went to the land. Eli, Silas, Tom, and the twins rode to the south pasture, not with rifles, but with shovels. They spent 2 days digging a firebreak, a long, ugly scar in the earth, to stop the flames from spreading. Clara was there, bringing water and food, her face smudged with soot, her hands raw. The fire burned for 3 days. It consumed 200 acres and killed nearly 30 head of cattle. The smell of burned death hung over the valley. When the last of the embers was out, Eli and Clara walked the scorched, blackened land. "This is where he started it," Eli said, kicking at a pile of oily rags. "Kerosene. He did this deliberately." "I know," Clara said. She pointed. "And look. There, in the soft ash near the creek bed, were boot prints, deep, angry, and with a distinctive split in the left heel. Silas has a pair of boots like that," Eli said, his voice quiet. "No," Clara said. "Silas's boots are old. These are new, and so are these." She pointed to the tracks of a single, shod horse. "He was not smart. He was just angry." They began to work. Eli, his face grim, rode to the Gideon homestead. He did not ask for help. He asked Daniel Gideon, "Did you see smoke 3 nights past, before the dawn?" Daniel, who owed his wife and son to Clara, nodded. "I did. Mr. Mercer came from the south, and I saw a rider, one man, riding hard, away from it, toward the Gray Ranch. It was too dark to see a face. But the horse, it was Gray's big bay. I'd know that horse anywhere." Clara went to town. She did not go to the gossips. She went to the bank. "Mr. Vance," she said, standing in his polished office. "Mrs. Mercer." He stood, his respect for her now plain. "A terrible thing. That fire. Terrible. It was Mr. Vance," Clara said. "And it was a crime. Amos Gray burned our pasture." Vance's face tightened. "That is a powerful accusation, my dear. It is a fact. We have evidence, boot prints, a witness who saw his horse, a kerosene can. We are requesting a legal hearing. From the circuit judge." Vance looked at her, at this plain woman with soot on her cheek and steel in her spine. "A hearing. It will be his word against yours. Gray has friends, and we have the truth," Clara said. "And we have neighbors, like Mr. Gideon, like you, Mr. Vance. We are asking the town to stand with the law, not with a coward who burns in the night." The hearing was held in the town hall, which was just the general store after hours. The circuit judge, a weary man named Miller, sat on a stack of feed sacks. The room was packed. Every rancher, every merchant, every wife was there. The air was hot and thick. Amos Gray was there, his face sullen, flanked by 2 of his own thuggish-looking hands. Eli spoke first. He was calm, cold, and factual. He laid out the history, the ambush, the threats, the fire, the boot prints, the kerosene. He presented the evidence like a man laying stones. Then Daniel Gideon spoke, his voice trembling, but firm. "I saw the horse, Your Honor. It was Mr. Gray's bay, riding from the fire." Then Amos Gray spoke. He laughed, a high, ugly sound. "It's lies, all of it. Mercer's been trying to steal my land for 20 years, just like his father. He set the fire himself, to blame me, to ruin me, and he's using her." He pointed a thick, shaking finger at Clara. This bought woman, this sham wife, he's using her to file a claim, to get sympathy. She ain't no wife. She's a field hand he bought for 5 cows. The room erupted. The pastor's wife gasped. Judge Miller slammed his gavel. "Order, order, Mr. Gray, you will address the matter at hand. Do you deny this evidence?" "I deny it all. It's his word, and hers, against mine." Judge Miller sighed. He looked at Clara, who was sitting beside Eli, her hands folded in her lap. "Mrs. Mercer, do you have anything to add to your husband's testimony?" Eli put his hand on hers. "Clara, you do not have to." Clara stood up. She looked at Eli, a small, private smile, and then she walked to the front of the room. She stood before the judge, a plain woman in her blue calico dress, her straw-colored hair pulled back in its simple braid. The room was dead silent. "Your Honor," she said, her voice quiet, but it carried to every corner. "My name is Clara Mercer, and Mr. Gray, he is right about one thing." A shocked murmur. Eli tensed. "I was a bought woman," Clara said, her voice clear. "My father, a man in Kansas, sold me to Mr. Mercer for 5 heifers and the clearing of a debt. I was, as Mr. Gray so kindly says, a field hand he bought for 5 cows. Amos Gray's jaw dropped. The entire room was frozen. "I came here as property," Clara continued, her eyes finding Gray's in the crowd. "I came here as a plain, worthless thing, sent to a man I had never met, to live on land I had never seen. I was ashamed, I was afraid, and I was silent." She turned to the judge. "But Mr. Gray, he does not understand the difference between a purchase and a partnership. He does not understand the difference between a contract and a marriage." She looked back at Gray. "You call me a bought woman, but you, Mr. Gray, You are a man who sees everything and everyone as something to be bought or broken. You see land as something to be stolen, not worked. You see neighbors as enemies, not allies. You see the law as something to be hidden from. Her voice rose, not in volume, but in power. A calm, quiet fury that was more terrifying than any shout. You tried to murder my husband. You left him to die in the dark, and when you failed, when he lived, you did not face him like a man. You came in the night like a coward, and you burned his land. You killed his animals. You did this, knowing he was still healing, still weak. You did this, thinking we were weak. She took a step closer. We are not weak, Mr. Gray, and we are not afraid of you. We have the truth. We have the law, and we have our home. She looked at the judge. He is guilty, and he is a coward, and that is all I have to say. She turned and walked back to her seat, her head high. She sat beside Eli, and his hand, his strong, calloused, scarred hand, found hers and gripped it. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Miller looked at Amos Gray. He looked at the townsfolk, who were staring at Gray with a new, cold contempt. He looked at Clara. Mr. Gray, the judge said, his voice flat. This court finds your testimony lacking. It finds the testimony of Mr. and Mrs. Mercer compelling. The evidence is clear. I find you guilty of arson, of destruction of property, and of a pattern of harassment that has endangered the lives of your neighbors. He slammed the gavel. You will be fined $1,000 to be paid in full to Mr. Mercer for his losses, and you will be confined to your own property for a period of 6 months. If I hear so much as a whisper of you crossing the Mercer line, I will see you in a federal prison. Gray was ruined. It was not just the fine, which was staggering. It was the shame. He had been beaten, in public, by the bought wife he had mocked. His name was Mud. Eli and Clara walked out of the store into the clean, bright sun, their hands locked together. The town, which had once whispered, now nodded. Mrs. Davies, the pastor's wife, stopped Clara on the street. That was the finest, bravest thing I have ever seen. Clara, you are a credit to this town. Clara's name was not just cleared, it was forged. That night, the house was quiet. The victory was sweet and clean. They sat by the hearth, the fire a comforting, contained thing. The air was clear. Eli had been quiet for almost an hour, just watching her read, her face serene in the firelight. Finally, he stood. There is one last thing, he said. She looked up, curious. He went to his study, the one she had once been afraid of, and came back with his locked metal box. He sat beside her on the rug, placing it between them. He unlocked it. Inside, there were ledgers and his father's watch, and there was a single, folded paper, a deed. While Mr. Vance was arranging the hearing, Eli said, I had him arrange something else, with his associate in Kansas. He took out the deed and handed it to her. She unfolded it. Her eyes scanned the legal writing, but she saw the names, her father's name, Jedediah, and the description of the small, dusty plot of land. This is my father's farm, she whispered, her blood going cold. Why do you have this? Read the last line, Eli said. She read, the land and all its holdings, sold by Jedediah to Mr. Eli Mercer. She looked at him, a sudden, sharp pain in her chest, a new fear. You bought it? You own my father? No, Eli said, his voice soft. He took the deed from her trembling hands. I bought it, so it was mine. He turned, not to the fire, but to the cook stove. He opened the iron firebox, the same one where he had burned her father's letter. The flames inside were hot and bright. He held the deed over the fire. Eli, what? They can't sell what was never theirs. Clara, he said, his voice a low, fierce vow. He looked at her, his scarred face illuminated by the flames. Your father, he did not own you. He did not have the right to sell you. You were never his property. You were never property at all." He held the deed over the fire, and the corner began to curl, to blacken, to turn to ash. "This," he said, his voice thick, "is just a bad piece of paper, a record of a lie. It's gone." He let go. The paper, the last remnant of her old life, of her shame, of her price, was consumed by the fire. It flared, bright and hot. And then it was nothing. Clara stared at the flames. The price, the 5 heifers, the humiliation, the worthlessness, all of it, gone. Ash. She turned to her husband, and she wept. It was not the desperate, broken sob of a girl who had been abandoned. It was not the weary sob of a woman who had saved her husband. It was a new sob, a cleansing one. She was grieving for the girl she had been, the one who had been told she was plain and worthless, and she was grateful. With a love so profound it was a physical ache, for the man who had just shown her she was priceless. Eli held her. He rocked her in his arms, his own eyes wet. He held her as the last of her past burned away, and their future, bright and clear, began. The fire on the deed was the last fire of their old life. The smoke that rose was the last of the poison. When the ash was cool, Eli scattered it on the wind, and they began again. A year passed. It was a year of work, not of war. The ranch, which had been a fortress, became a home. Eli, who had been a creature of fences and ledgers, learned the shape of his wife's laughter. Clara, who had been a ghost, became a presence. She was no longer Mercer's bought wife. In town, she was Mrs. Mercer. But on the range, among the homesteaders she had helped, she was known as something more. She was the strong woman, the one who had saved the Gideon's baby, the one who had run the ranch, the one who had faced down Amos Gray with nothing but the truth. Her plainness, once a mark of her worthlessness, was now forgotten. People saw her, and they saw her strength. Her strength was tested. The land, which they had won from a man, now turned on them with an enemy they could not fight. The summer was a brutal, brassy thing. The rains that should have come in May never arrived. The sky, which had been a piercing, hopeful blue, became a pale, milky white, thick with dust. The creek bed, the one Gray and Eli's father had feuded over, dried to a cracked, gray ribbon of mud. The drought was a slow, grinding siege. The sun was not a life-giver. It was a hammer. It beat the color from the land, leaving a world of brown and gray. The wind, which had once been a lonely companion, became a tormentor, a hot, dry breath that stole the moisture from a man's skin, from the earth, from hope itself. Eli and Clara fought it together. They rode the lines, not for enemies, but for dying cattle, their eyes aching from the grit. They hauled water from the deep well, the only one that had not yet failed, rationing it first for the people, then for the horses, and last for the few calves they were trying to save. "It's a judgment," Silas, the foreman, said, his face a leathery map of worry. "The land, it's just too hard. Ma'am?" Clara, her lips cracked and her hair covered in a fine layer of dust, just shook her head. "It is not a judgment, Silas, it is just the land. It will rain." But it did not. The dust storms came in August. They were not wind. They were moving walls of earth. The sky would turn a sick, reddish yellow, and the sun would disappear for days. A pale, lost coin in a sea of grit. They sealed the house, stuffing rags in the windows and doors. But the dust came in. It was a fine, choking powder that covered the floors, the quilt, the food. It was in their mouths when they woke, in their eyes when they slept. One afternoon, a storm hit so fast it caught Eli in the fields. Clara stood on the porch, her hand on her belly, which had begun to show a small, firm curve. She watched the black wall approach, a tumbling, roaring monster of wind and dirt. "Eli," she whispered, her fear a cold, hard stone. She kept the lantern lit in the window all afternoon, though she knew he could not see it. She waited, her body rigid. As the house groaned and the wind shrieked, the sound of 1,000 mad souls trying to get in. Just before dusk, the door was torn open. He fell inside. Not a man, but a creature made of dust. He was coughing, his face a caked, unrecognizable mask. She did not speak. She helped him up. She led him to the kitchen. She poured a dipper of their precious water into the basin. He plunged his head into it, the sound of it a small, desperate blessing. He came up, sputtering, wiping the mud from his face. He looked at her. He had been terrified, not for himself, but that he would not make it back to her. She just touched his cheek, her hand leaving a pale print. "You are home." They ate their supper in the dim, dusty light, the wind still howling. The grit was in the bread. "I lost maybe 10 head," he said, his voice raw. They just turned their backs to the wind and gave up. "We will survive." "Eli," she said, her hand resting on her stomach. He looked at her, at the small, defiant life she was carrying inside her. He reached across the table, his hand, caked with dirt, covering hers. "Yes," he said, "we will." And in that moment, in the heart of the dust and the despair, they knew it was true. This was not a test. This was just life, and they would live it. The drought, which had begun in fire, ended in water. Winter was dry and cold, the ground frozen solid, with no snow to protect the winter wheat. When spring arrived, it came not as a gentle thaw, but as a violent rebellion. The sky, which had been empty for nearly a year, turned a deep, bruised, angry purple, and it opened. It rained. It rained for a week, a solid, unrelenting, biblical deluge. The hard, baked earth, which had forgotten how to drink, could not absorb it. The dry creek bed, the arroyos, the shallow prairie draws, they became raging, muddy, brown rivers. The water had nowhere to go. It rose. Clara was in the house. Her time was near, the baby a heavy, welcome weight. Eli had forbidden her from leaving the porch. The land, which had been a sea of dust, was now a sea of water. The Mercer Ranch was an island, the barns and the house standing in a wide, churning lake of brown floodwater. "It's God's own wrath," Cookie muttered, watching a chicken coop float by. "Drought, then this, he's trying to wash us all away." "He's just cleaning the slate," Clara said, smiling. She stood on the porch, her hand on her back, feeling the first dull ache. She had felt it all morning. A low, persistent pain, like a bad stomach, but it was coming and going, coming and going, and coming, closer. "Eli," she said, her voice a little too calm. He was at the corral, knee-deep in water, trying to secure the horses on the one high piece of ground. He turned, the rain plastering his black hair to his head. The baby," she said, and her calm broke. A small, sharp pain, a real one, made her gasp. "Eli, it's coming, now!" His face went white, whiter than the rain. No, it's 3 weeks early. It's not." "It is," she said, her voice tight. She grabbed the door frame. "The pain was real. You have to get Mrs. Davies, the pastor's wife. She's the midwife. You have to get her." He looked at the world. It was not a world. It was a river. The 10 miles to town. It was not land. It was a cold, rushing, debris-filled current. He was frozen. The man who had faced fire and guns and his own death was frozen with a new, impossible terror. "Eli!" Her voice was a whip crack, the voice that had commanded a ranch. "Go! Ride! Now!" The command broke his paralysis. He did not question. He did not pause. He ran, slogging through the water, to the barn. He grabbed his best horse, the strong bay mare who was afraid of nothing. He did not saddle her. There was no time. He grabbed a handful of mane, hauled himself onto her bare back, and kicked her into the water. Clara watched from the porch. She watched her husband, the tall, scarred, powerful man who had given her a life, ride into a flood. The horse stumbled, recovered, and then began to swim. A strong, desperate motion, its head held high, Eli clinging to its back. They disappeared into the gray, driving rain. 2 small specks of courage against an impossible world. "Be safe," she whispered. She turned and went inside. Cookie, the old, grumpy cook, was standing in the kitchen, his face ashen. "Ma'am," he said, his voice trembling. I don't know nothing about birthin'." "Boil water," she snapped, her general's voice returning. "Boil all the water we have, and get me the clean sheets, and the whiskey. Go!" The ride was a nightmare. Eli was not riding on land. He was riding in a river. The water was a living, grabbing thing, cold as ice, pulling at him, trying to suck the horse under. Debris, branches, a homesteader's drowned pig, part of a roof swirled around him. The mare was strong, but she was tiring, her breaths coming in huge, snorting gasps. "Come on, girl," he roared over the sound of the rain. Just get us there. Get us to Clara." He did not know how long he rode. An hour. A lifetime. The horse found high ground, lost it, and had to swim again. He was soaked, frozen, his body numb, his mind a single, burning prayer. Clara. 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 He reached town. It was a ghost town. The street a river, the houses islands. He swam the horse to the pastor's small house, which sat on a rise. He fell from the horse's back, his legs useless, and pounded on the door. Mrs. Davies, a small bird-like woman with eyes of iron, opened it. "Mr. Mercer," she said, her hands flying to her mouth. Dear God." "Clara," he gasped, his teeth chattering. "The baby. It's coming. Now. You have to come. The flood." "Mrs." Davies did not panic. She turned. "Pastor, my bag. Mr. Mercer, you get in this house and get warm." "No," he said, grabbing her arm. "There's no time. We have to go back. Now. I can't." The woman's iron eyes softened. She looked at this huge, terrifying, broken man, and she saw the pure, unadulterated terror of a husband who was about to lose everything. "We will go," she said. "But your mare is spent. We will take the pastor's buggy, the strong one, and his mule team. They are slower, but they will not panic. Now, help me." Clara's world was a small, dark place of white-hot pain. The storm outside was nothing to the storm inside her. It was too soon. It was all wrong. It's not," she gasped, clutching Cookie's leathery hand. "You're doing fine, ma'am," the old man said, his voice shaking, his face pale. "Just fine. You're the strongest woman I ever knew. You just hold on. He's coming." But she was fading. The pain was too much. It had been hours. Something was wrong. Just when she thought she could not hold on, just when the darkness was pulling her under, she heard a sound, the rumble of wheels, a shout. The door burst open. Eli stood there, a drowned giant, his face a mask of terror, and behind him, a small, dry, calm angel. "Mrs. Davies." Clara wept, her voice a thread. "I am here, child," the midwife said, already shrugging off her coat, her hands moving, efficient and sure. "I am here. Eli, you wait. Cookie, you come help me." Eli was banished to the porch, to the rain, to the same place he and Daniel Gideon had waited. He paced. He paced in the water, a caged, terrified animal. He heard sounds from the house, a low, steady murmur from Mrs. Davies, a sharp, ugly groan from Cookie, and then a scream from Clara, a sound so full of agony and terror that it brought him to his knees. He fell into the water, his hands covering his ears. "No, please, God, not her. Take the land, take the cattle, not her." And then silence, a terrible, endless, complete silence. The rain stopped, the wind died, the world held its breath. He stood, his heart a dead stone. He pushed open the door. The room was dim. Mrs. Davies was at the basin, her back to him. Cookie was slumped in a chair, his face in his hands, and Clara. Clara was on the bed. She was pale, her eyes closed, her straw-colored hair plastered to her face with sweat. She was so still. No, he whispered, his world ending. Clara, and then a cry, a thin, weak, furious little wail. Clara's eyes opened. She turned her head. Slowly, in the crook of her arm, wrapped in a clean feed sack, was a small, red, impossibly tiny thing. Eli stumbled forward. He fell to his knees beside the bed. The child was... It was so small. It was a boy. He was breathing. But he was so small. Clara was sobbing, not in pain, not in fear. She was sobbing, great, gasping, grateful tears. She held the baby up. Eli, she wept. He's here. Eli looked at the child. He looked at his wife, who had been to the edge of death and back, and the man of iron, the man of scars, the man who had not wept since he was a child, broke. He laid his head on the mattress, his broad shoulders shaking, and he wept. He wept for the fear and the pain and the rage and the pure, agonizing, impossible joy of it all. Clara put her free hand on his head, her fingers tangling in his wet, black hair, holding him, comforting him, as he had once held her. Mrs. Davies finally spoke, her voice gentle. He nearly didn't survive. Mr. Mercer. He came too fast and too soon. But his mother, she is a fighter, and so is he. They named him Samuel. It is a Hebrew name. Clara whispered, her voice still weak, as she rocked the child in her arms. It means God has heard. Eli sat on the floor by her bed, his head resting against the frame. He has, he said, his voice thick. He has heard. The flood waters receded. The land, washed clean, began to heal. The prairie, in its relentless way, exploded in a riot of green. The world was reborn, and so was the Mercer Ranch. Eli, his hands restless, his heart overflowing, needed to make something. He was not a man of words, but he was a man of his hands. He went to the barn, and for a week, in the quiet moments when the baby slept, he worked. He took wood from the old pine that had stood by his father's original cabin. He planed, he sawed, he sanded, his rough, scarred hands moving with an unfamiliar tenderness. He built a rocking chair. It was not a fine, carved thing from the East. It was solid. It was strong. It was built to last forever. He brought it to her and placed it by the hearth, the one his father had built. Clara sat in it, Samuel in her arms, and the fit was perfect. Clara, too, needed to make... She took the quilt she had stitched, their patchwork life, and she took her needle, and on the blue calico square, the one he had bought for her in town, she stitched a name. Not her father's, not a bargain, a fact. She stitched, in neat, strong letters, Clara Mercer. The summer nights were cool, the sky washed clean by the rain, a dark, velvet thing bursting with stars. The wind, which had been a monster, was now a lullaby, a gentle, whispering breath over the plains. They sat on the porch, Eli in his chair, Clara in her new rocker. The baby, Samuel, slept in a small basket between them. The house was quiet. The world was quiet. Eli was watching her, as he so often did. As if she were a puzzle he was still, wonderfully, solving. "What is it?" she asked, her voice soft. "I was just thinking," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Thinking about that first day, in Kansas. My father," she said, her voice small. "No, not him." He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I was thinking about you, and what a fool I was." He reached out, his finger tracing the line of her jaw, the one she had always thought was too plain. "You were never plain. Clara," he whispered, his voice thick with a truth he had taken a lifetime to understand. "You were just never seen right." Clara's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of a joy so profound it was an ache. She looked at this man, her husband, this scarred, beautiful, broken, and whole man. She looked at her child, sleeping in the starlight. She looked at the house she had saved, the land she had fought for. She leaned into him, her head resting on his strong shoulder. her heart so full she thought it might burst. She finally, truly, belonged. Not because someone had chosen her, or bought her, or claimed her, but because they had chosen each other. The wind howled, high and lonely, over the dark, sleeping plains. Inside the house, their fire burned, warm and bright. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a true honor to share the tale of Eli and Clara Mercer with you. A story, I find, is not complete until it has been heard. I'm always curious to know where my words land. So, if you have a moment, I would be deeply grateful if you would leave a comment and let me know where in this wide, wonderful world you are listening from. If this kind of story, a story of the real, hard, and beautiful West, is one that settles in your heart, I would be proud to have you subscribe to From Wild West. And of course, I would be privileged to hear your thoughts on the story. Please feel free to share them, in English, in the comments. I read everyone. Until next time, be well.